Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And my guest today is Kimia Moghadam. She's a licensed mental health counselor and the clinical director at My Therapy NYC, where she helps individuals and couples navigate trauma, intimacy, and the emotional terrain of relationships. With a blend of honesty, compassion, and humor, she creates space for real conversations about healing, identity, and starting over. Welcome, Kimia, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here and have this conversation.
You describe your style as relational, compassionate, and honest. What does that actually look like in the sessions, especially when you're dealing with couples navigating separation and divorce?
Great question. I think I committed to myself when I became a therapist to not be one of those therapists that make therapy very more painful than it needs to be. So I use a lot of compassion, sense of humor in my work with clients to kind of like ease them into it and create a level of safety and trust in the room so that they are willing to have harder conversations in the room with me. The honesty piece of it, especially with couples, is that I do tend to hold my clients very accountable for what they say and do, especially in the session. And again, like I don't want to be a therapist that I validate and affirm everything my clients say and do, because at a certain point, I think at that point, I'm doing a disservice. So in the session, if I hear something that I don't particularly agree with, or I don't personally like the way that it sounds, very lovingly and gently, I bring attention to that in the room. Especially with couples, they tend to, whatever stage they are in couples therapy, they tend to argue a lot. There's a lot of disrespectful language in the room, raising their voices, and I don't really tolerate that in the room. Again, very lovingly and gently, I over and over and over again hold them accountable for how they show up there.
Well, it sounds like what you're doing is really reflecting back to them a little bit of how the dynamic between them can sometimes take over and overwhelm the situation, but that you're there. And by observing and participating, you can remind them that maybe they crossed a boundary or they slide into this kind of what I think of as like a shorthand, right? That they have, and that the shorthand, they're not necessarily communicating as well as they think they are, right?
Exactly. Literally, couples therapy, especially in beginning stages, again, whether you're going through separation or you're trying to work on your relationship, literally looks like courtroom drama. Everyone's there to defend themselves. They have receipts. They'll come. They'll have 5 different examples why they're not wrong and why the other person is wrong, and it never goes anywhere. It's not beneficial, and that's my role. I have to stop that cycle.
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, Kimia, it can sound like I know sometimes clients say to me, especially when I'm working as a mediator, do you want to see the text? Let me just show you the text, right? And like somehow or other, I'm the arbiter of right and wrong, as if, I certainly don't want to be in that role as a mediator. I bet you don't want to either. So, how do you navigate that complexity?
One of the things that I do in the very first session, or maybe even the second session, and it's an ongoing conversation, I create some ground rules for how we're gonna be here in this space with each other. One of the ground rules that I said is that if you're going to argue here, we're not going to, very basic ones, we're not going to raise our voice, stick to I statements. We're not going to use generalized statements. I'm sure he's not always not doing something. So stick to I statements, stick to your own experiences and feelings. Don't talk over each other. And also, if you're going to argue, we're going to stick to the argument that you're bringing in. And we're not going to use past examples of like, remember 5 years ago, you did that thing. And if you do that, I'm going to remind you that we're breaking these ground rules and ask you to take a deep breath and reword your sentence in a different way using all of the ground rules that we've set in place.
I think that one of the reasons that happens is that the dynamic becomes so competitive between people when the relationship starts to break down is it feels like their very identity is at stake. And so they're fighting for survival. I mean, it can really, really feel like that. And a lot of people who are going through divorce or on the other side of divorce feel like they've lost them connection with themselves, lost themselves. They've lost their way. They remember who they were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but somehow or other, a long distance has gotten in between that person and who they see themselves as today. And so, well, first of all, do you think that observation is correct? And if you do, how do you help people rediscover themselves or find or discover themselves anew this, 10, 15, 20 years later?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very correct observation. I think to some degree, it's very, very normal. I would be surprised if someone's in a long-term relationship and nothing about them changes. Even outside of a relationship, we change, and that's just life. And once upon a time, 15 years ago, who you were is not going to be who you are today. But I do think in a relationship, long-term relationship, that happens a lot more. And that's okay. And that's normal. And there is nothing wrong with that. But I do think like when you go through separation specifically, that becomes really hard because then your entire life is different now and you don't know who you are outside of this relationship, outside of all the things that you do with your partner, the friends that you share, the vacation spots that you go to, the restaurants that you love and you go to, all the TV shows that you watch with each other. All of that becomes a we decision in your relationship. Where do we eat? Where do we go? Who do we hang out with? And suddenly that other person is no longer there. And you have to decide on all of these things by yourself. And you don't know what that is anymore. And that's totally okay. It's going to take a lot of time and it's scary, but it can also be super exciting because it feels like you're being reborn almost and starting over life. And that gives you a lot of opportunities to explore.
I think that for a lot of people, particularly, and I guess this is maybe changing some, but particularly for women who have been out of the workforce, raising children, I think that it is hard to rediscover who you are when your kids are now in college, they're launched, they're not home all the time, you're not going to drop off and pick up and play dates and doctor appointments, and you're not also married. And so how you show up in the world, I'm a mom, but I'm not visibly a mom today, right? I'm not married anymore. Like what who is that person? And a lot of people say, well, I'm too old to rediscover my career and all of that. So what do you say to listeners who might be finding themselves in that situation as to how they could start to find that path back?
The first thing that I would say is that yes, absolutely, is incredibly hard. It's harder, and again, we might be biased. We're women, but it is hard. It's incredibly hard to rebuild your life at a certain point, and especially because if you're a mom, that's an identity, right? You're a mom, it's an identity. Being a wife or even a husband or a partner, that is an identity. And when you get out of these life phases, whether your kids are in college, you go through separation, it feels like someone is taking that identity away from you. Then you have no other identity to replace it with. So you feel very exposed, very vulnerable. And it's, again, incredibly terrifying. One thing that I love to remind is that being a mom, regardless of how old or young your kids are, that identity will never be taken away from you. It just looks different. And you have to figure out how your identity as a mom, now that your kids are in college, can look like. What does that mean now? So it's still reminding yourself that identity is not going anywhere. Just looks different, it feels different, but it's still there. You can still ground yourself in that identity, but figuring out creative ways to still empower that identity and feel good about it. Go ahead.
No, no,
Oh,
go ahead.
and the identity as a wife or a partner that no longer is there, that is a loss. I think there's a grief period that you are grieving loss of that identity. And it's so sad. You can be angry about it, sad about it. And I don't think that grief goes away. It becomes very small over time. Your life grows around it. Eventually, you'll figure out different identities that are as important to you, whatever that is. But it's grief. It'll always be there.
I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast. It's a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce related topics so that everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure that you don't miss an episode. And I'm talking today with Kimia Moghadam about relationships and post divorce relationships and healing. And Camilla, I think a lot of people have a kind of myth about relationships, And so I'm wondering, what do you see as some common cultural myths about what a healthy relationship is supposed to be? And how does those stories shape how people deal with divorce and the shame of divorce? Because I think that's one of the cultural myths about it.
Absolutely. It's an amazing question. And this is something that I constantly talk about, whether it's with my clients, even with my friends, family, everyone in my life. I genuinely think a huge part of what we believe about romance comes from pop culture, movies. I grew up with Disney princess movies. My idea of romance is Cinderella, and that is not true. It's not reality, right? And I think it's really hard to unlearn those views or notions of romance that we have and create a realistic version of it that looks very different than what we believe in. And I think with divorce, no one gets married to think about divorce. No one prepares you for it. You don't want to think about it. So it's always an unexpected event in your life that you never thought it would happen to you. And suddenly it's here. You don't want to accept it. You don't want to deal with it. And honestly, that's a reason why a lot of people also stay in relationships longer than they should because of that resistance of wanting to accept that, like, this is happening to me. And that's okay. And it's normal. And it's nothing bad. It's nothing that you did wrong. It's just, it happens. It's okay.
So, are you talking about a person who has been left or a person who's leaving or both?
I think both. I think we all deal with that level of resistance or denial or shame one way or another, whether we are the ones that want to leave but can't do it, or we're the ones that someone is leaving us. It's still that it's something that we don't want to believe that it's happening to us, and we were never prepared for it.
Yeah, I think that when I think about my own situation, my own divorce, I was the first person in my family to ever get divorced, like ever, going back generations. And my grandmother told me, and listeners to this podcast know this story. My grandmother told me before I got married for the first time that I could never get divorced. And I was a divorce lawyer at the time. So it was kind of ironic, right? And I said, well, if I'm not happy, I'm going to get divorced. And she said, no, you can't do that. The family comes first. And she meant, you need to have affairs. If you need to be an alcoholic, a drug addict, you need to do whatever you need to do. You just can't get divorced. And it never really occurred to me. So I'm really interested, Camille, when you say, people stay longer than they should have. You said something like that just a few seconds ago. And so where is that moment that it becomes not a good idea to stay anymore when it would be more healthy to end that relationship?
Yeah, good question. I think what you said is so important to understand as well. I think this is easier said than done leaving. It's so complex that especially I don't know if we have time for that, but you have to think about like cultural components, religious values. It's not easy. Some people leaving is not an option. You have to think about finances. There's so much into it that like divorce is for some people really doesn't feel like a possibility, which is very sad to think about. But I do think like people get stuck in these places because of all of these things. And some of it is incredibly real. For example, thinking about a woman that's financially dependent on her husband, like leaving, what would that look like? What would that even mean for that person? Is it easier for her to stay and deal with the issues in this relationship, even if it comes at a cost of her unhappiness versus like leaving and not having any financial resources? What would happen to her then?
Yeah, I just want to say for those people who are listening who might be thinking, I can't afford to leave. I don't have any options here. You don't know that's true. And until you speak to a lawyer in your jurisdiction and get more information about that, whatever your spouse or partner is telling you, what is the law, do not believe them because that is classic controlling behavior to tell someone that they can't do something, they don't have the resources, nobody cares, nobody's going to help. And none of that stuff. That is classic controlling behavior. So please do yourself a favor and call a lawyer and get the answers to that question. So sorry
Absolutely.
for my little
Oh,
getting up there and pontificating about that, but that is we hear that all the time at the law firm. Oh, I've been unhappy for years, but my spouse told me, and usually it's the man, told me that I couldn't afford to, whatever, whatever. And it's just, but
and that is my kind of like conclusion that I was gonna come to, that like regardless of what the reason is in your head that it's convincing you to stay, there are going to be other options. There are resources for you to utilize, and the choice shouldn't be that to suffer for the rest of your life versus that's it. That should not be the choice there, because regardless of what is happening in your relationship and what your situation is, you will have options. And I think deciding when to leave, if you are unhappy, if you feel like you've lost yourself, if you wake up every day and you just don't have the motivation to get out of bed and be part of your life and be with your partner, that is your cue to start thinking about your options, start talking to your community, reach out to your friends, family members, your own kids, whoever that support system is, start talking to them.
yeah. And talk to someone like you, Kimia, about trying to sort through those things because it may not be. I'm not suggesting that people leave the first bad fight they've got, that there's a lot of miscommunication that can happen there that could be sorted out.
Absolutely. But it's like start talking to other people, whatever that person and whoever that person is, to kind of get a perspective.
So let's change the subject a little and talk a little bit about dating after divorce. I hear people, my clients will say to me, I am never going to date again. The last thing in the world I want to do. And I say, well, listen, if you decide that you want to get married again, oh, no, no, that's never going to happen. I'm never going on a date. And then I'm like, okay, but when you decide you're going to get married again, please give me a call so we can talk about a prenup. And then 2 years later, they always call me and go, hey, Catherine, guess what? Ha, 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 ha. And I'm like, I knew that you were going to be able to get back on the proverbial horse. So, Camilla, talk to the listeners about dating after divorce and what that can feel like and what that journey is also like.
I hear exactly the same things from my own clients. Never dating again. I'm like, okay, all right, fine. We'll talk about that 5 months from now, 6 months from now. I mean, I think dating is hard for everyone, whether you're single right now, whether you're going through a divorce, you've gone through the divorce. Dating is not, if someone is out there and tells you that dating is so fun for them and they just love to date, I don't think they're being truthful. And you can fight me on this. Dating is not fun. Dating is hard regardless because it puts us in the most vulnerable places. It brings out the most traumatic experiences that we've had in the past. It opens up a lot of wounds that maybe we didn't even know they existed. And I think for that, it's really, really hard. But going through separation, there's an added layer of just complication because those wounds are very much open right now. It's not that it's a closed wound. You're hurting, you're in pain right now. And to add another factor where it's going to destabilize you even more, which is dating, it's just a really, really hard thing to do. So I think with my clients now, when they tell me they're never going to date, I don't fight them on it. That's really how they feel in the moment. And I'm like, okay, if you tell me that you never want to date ever again, I will never push you. And I think I just allow them to feel that because I think that's just them protecting themselves from being hurt again or feeling more pain. And I don't want to take that away from them. And I know that they need to be protected right now. So I allow them to feel that and just be like, I never want to date. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But we'll always come back to it. And I think what I will tell the listeners that are experiencing this, just give yourself a lot of time and patience and grace. You don't need to go back to dating right away because you are not ready. You probably, if your body is telling you never want to date again, listen to that. That's just telling you're not ready right now to feel more anxiety. And that's okay. But you will eventually get there.
You're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast, and I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce and relationship issues for over 10 years. Subscribe to the podcast, and don't forget to check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with Kimia Moghadam about the divorce journey, the emotional journey of separating and divorce. And Camille, if people want to learn more about you or want to contact you, how can they do that?
Absolutely. You can go on our website. It's mytherapynyc.com, or you can directly email me at Kimia, which is my first name, Kimia, at mytherapynyc.com.
Great. And I just want to talk a little bit about the post-divorce relationship between the former couple, right? So it took me about 7 years before I was no longer triggered by my ex-husband's things that triggered me when we were married, right? And like 7 years before like he could do what he was doing and I wouldn't, my heart rate wouldn't go up and I wouldn't get into that defensive posture we were talking about earlier at the top of the show. And so how do you recommend or talk to people about maybe a faster disconnect from that conflictual pattern?
Yeah, good question. That's why I love couples therapy for couples that are going through separation actively, because that space gives them an opportunity to really heal together and really talk about all the things that they've gone through together and get a lot of closure and separate in a very respectful and almost really loving way from each other, because they get to say their piece, they get to talk about their hurt, and they get to tell their partner how they've hurt them, and they get to get an apology. And that doesn't really happen in a lot of separations. But if you are in couples therapy and separating actively, you get to have these deeper conversations with each other and actually understand why things happened the way they did and get that type of closure. So that is a quick fix, I think, for that problem. If again, you have the resources to be in couples therapy.
Yeah, I think a lot of it in my own personal and my professional experience is disconnecting the intent from the reaction, right? So if someone like one post divorce example just for myself personally is that if I was late dropping off the kids or late getting home when he was going to be picking them up by a few minutes, I thought, I'm just running late, and he would think that was a like an attack on his or he was his fatherhood, his parenthood was at risk because I was robbing him of time. And so I would have this defensive reaction because, in reality, okay, this was his time with the kids. He really valued it. And I didn't have to have such a defensive, angry response. And so I could choose a different path, right? Which is one, be on time. Right? Like I could legitimately say, hey, we got to leave earlier in order to be on time because we're going to hit traffic or there's a risk of this, that, or the other thing. And at least hear his complaint, even if I thought he was wrong, and not just like get right down into that. No, I did. Yes, no, I didn't. Yes, you did, kind of dynamic. Does that sound like familiar?
Absolutely. I mean, whether you are co-parenting or separated and you just want to have good relationship and be friends, or you're still in a relationship, that is the core of our conflict. And even beyond relationships, in any interpersonal relationship, that's why we fight with each other. We take things personally. We take whatever the other person is doing as an act of they don't care about me, they don't love me. And we react from that place because we're hurt that why wouldn't my partner care enough about me to do this thing that they know it's important to me? And then but instead of telling them about our hurt, we tell them like, how dare you be late? I can't believe you did this again. And when you use that tone, the other person immediately gets defensive as well. And they feel like they're under attack, or they feel shame. They feel like my God, I did something wrong. And they start attacking back, versus like you want to teach someone in couples therapy specifically, you want to tell them like, hey, so when your partner was not on time to pick up the kids, you felt like she didn't care about you or your needs in that moment, right? So if that's the hurt that you were holding on to, can you share that with her? Can you tell her that you were just hurt by this, versus attacking her and saying like, you da 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 da, you never do this, you always blah blah blah. And then
Yeah.
when you hear that, you also soften to that. You're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you in that way. I totally understand the importance of this. And that you will be more mindful about it too, now knowing how important this is.
Is that one way that people can move beyond resentment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we build resentment when we just nitpick at each other and yell at each other, use generalized statements and make each other feel like we're bad people. and making each other feel like we're a bad partner. But if we're teaching each other and ourselves to talk about your feelings, talk about your need, verbalize your need, and say, like, hey, I need this from you because this is important to me for X, Y, and Z, then you're really advocating for your needs. You're getting your needs met because the other person is now aware of that and knows how important it is, and they're more likely to give it to you.
So, Kimia Moghadam, we're near the end of the show, but just in our final minute or two, what's one thing that you wish more people understood about reconnecting after a relationship ends, and whether or not that's with their former partner, their kids, or themselves?
That it's a journey. Allow yourself time, allow yourself the grace and whatever that you need, and set intentions for why you're trying to reconnect with certain people. What are you hoping to get out of that reconnection? And be very specific about it, that intention, so that you're managing your expectations and you know exactly what you're hoping for and you can advocate for that.
Well, thank you so much, Kimia Moghadam. It's been a pleasure to have you as my guest on Divorce Dialogues.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.